The book that survived because it was good cloth. Mihajlo Barak came home from Egypt in 1849 with a mummy. He was newly retired from a drafting job at the Hungarian court chancellery in Vienna. Not rich from the salary. 6 years before, he'd leased the German-language newspaper in Bratislava for 6,310 gulden a year, and whatever that arrangement was, it paid. So he went to Egypt, the way well-off Europeans did in the 1840s, and came back having bought a body. Where he bought it nobody knows. Museum archivists in Zagreb went through his papers in the 1980s looking for that exact thing. Alexandria gets stated confidently in a lot of places, and I don't know where that came from, because it isn't in the papers. What he did with her, we know precisely. He stood her upright in a glass case in his apartment on the Old Fleshmarkt, hung silk curtains on the case, put her in among his art collection. She had already been unwrapped, so he could see what was in there with her. Flowers in her hair. Gold, blue beads, bird bones, a small crocodile, a cat's head in the funeral wreath. The bandages went into a second case of their own, laid out flat, because they had writing on them and that seemed interesting. Barak died in 1859. His will said the mummy should go to Zagreb, and after correspondence involving a ban and something called a Royal Vicegerential Council, which I looked up twice and still couldn't tell you what it did, 3 purpose-built crates went by rail to Zidani most, and then by cart the rest of the way. Total shipping cost, 75 florins and 20 kruzer. Midjat Sabeljar, the custodian who took delivery, wrote in the inventory that most of the bandages had writings and hieroglyphs on them. They weren't hieroglyphs. In 1869, the museum brought in Heinrich Brugsch, who was halfway through compiling the first serious dictionary of Egyptian, to sort out the Egyptian collection. Brugsch is the first person to actually handle the thing knowing it was a thing. 40 meters of linen. Fine linen, woven for the purpose, in strips that had once been a single sheet about 3 meters 40 long and 44 centimeters tall, folded concertina style into 13 columns, 12 of them written and the last one left blank as a cover. Letters 7 millimeters high, and they never vary. Red rules box in each column. The analysis found mercury sulfide in them, so cinnabar. Black ink for the letters, and the black is charred ivory. Not the cheap option. One hand wrote all of it. Brugsch could tell the script was alphabetic. That ruled out everything Egyptian and got him no further. He said so in print, which was decent of him. For the next 2 decades, the bandages sat in Zagreb collecting visitors. Richard Burton came and made tracings. The explorer, the Mecca one. I have no idea what became of them. Leo Rianisk in Vienna kept pushing for somebody to publish. Eventually Brugsch wrote to a colleague of his there, Jakob Krall, who worked on Coptic as well. And at the end of January 1891, the strips went to Vienna and sat in the university library for a year while Krall worked on them. He laid them out. He shuffled them into a plausible order. At some point that year, he understood that the alphabet was Greek in origin, written right to left, and the language underneath it was Etruscan. Which meant that a book from central Italy, written maybe 2 centuries before Christ, had been cut into strips with a knife and wrapped around a woman in Egypt who had nothing to do with any of it. We can read Etruscan. Greeks in the Bay of Naples handed over the alphabet around 700 BC. It is a perfectly ordinary alphabet where every letter has a sound we're reasonably sure of. You can stand in front of an Etruscan inscription and say it out loud and be roughly right. You just won't know what you said. Which matters more than it sounds, because the Romans tell us there was a lot to read. Cicero, Festus, Censorinus, and a late one, Ammianus Marcellinus. Between them they describe a whole literature, the Etrusca Disciplina, books on reading livers, books on reading lightning, and books of ritual. The liver books are the famous ones, and honestly they bore me. It's the ritual ones that matter here, because they supposedly laid out how you go about founding a city, how to consecrate an altar, how to divide a people into tribes, how to count the ages of the world. The Romans kept consulting Etruscan specialists for centuries after Etruria stopped existing as a place, and not a page of any of that literature survives in Etruscan. So, Etruscan isn't Indo-European. Its nearest relatives are two other dead languages most people have never heard of: Lemnian, off the island of Lemnos, plus Rhetic from up in the Alps. Helmut Rix worked out in the 90s that the three make a family, which is the consensus now, though some people want a fourth in there from the Camonica Valley. Grammatically, it looks like none of its neighbors. Agglutinative, verb final, no gender in the way Latin has gender, and it stacks case endings 2 and 3 deep. I have read that sentence about 10 times, and it still won't stay in my head. About 13,000 Etruscan inscriptions survive. Almost all of them say some version of "this is the tomb of so-and-so, son of so-and-so, who lived 54 years. So Etruscan personal names are extremely well understood. The verbs are a different matter. We know a few hundred words of the language with real confidence. There is no Rosetta Stone. People will tell you the Pieghi tablets are the Etruscan Rosetta Stone. 3 gold sheets found at a sanctuary north of Rome in 1964. 2 in Etruscan, 1 in Phoenician, a dedication by a ruler named the Fairy Velianas. 37 words on the Etruscan side. Neither version is a literal translation of the other. They say roughly the same thing in the way 2 press releases do. What it gave us was the equation of the goddess uni with a start, plus the word for year and the word for 3. When Krall counted somewhere around 1,300 words on those bandages, he had in front of him a text more than 3 times the length of the next longest thing in the language, which is a terracotta roof tile from near Capua. That tile is worth a minute. It's the Tabula Capuana, about 390 words, written around 470 BC, so 2.5 centuries before the Linen Book and a long way further south. It is also a ritual calendar, whose sections are headed by month names. It uses the Linen Book's word for a libation and the Linen Book's piglets. Whoever wrote on that linen was working inside a tradition that had already been holding still for a very long time. Now method. Wilhelm Deek sketched it in 1875. Massimo Palatino made it doctrine. It's called the combinatorial method. The rule is internal evidence only, not resemblances to other languages, which is how the 19th century wasted itself. What counts is the archaeology, the physical context, and above everything the structure of the text worked against itself. There are 2 book-length commentaries on this object, one Italian and one English. They disagree about very nearly every word in it, and I'll spare you most of that. A liturgy repeats. One phrase runs through this book at least 17 times. In one form it goes, Sacniclari silthal spurari methlumeric enas. In another form, Sacnixters silth spuresters enas. Same words. Different endings. Hold the phrase steady, watch the endings move, and the case system falls out. Same phrase, different job in the sentence. That's all that's happening, and it's enough. Etruscan marks on behalf of one way and by means of another, and it takes no dictionary to see it. Then that root Sacni starts turning up everywhere. Sacniclari, Sacnixters, Sacnicla. There are another 3 of those, and you get the idea. The phrase probably says something like, for the priesthood of the citadel, and for the city, and for the community. Silth is the arx, sorry, I should have said the citadel, the fortified high part of a town. Spur is the city meaning its citizens. Methlum is something wider than that. Those are guesses. Good ones but guesses. And it's a calendar of obligations rather than of days. On this date, in this month, This rite, these offerings to this god. Some of the dates are legible. In column 6, there's the sequence Eslam Zathrumis Akale. The last word is a month. A late Latin glossary preserves the Etruscan name for June as a clues. The first two words are a number built the way Latin builds 18. Latin says duodvigenti, 2 from 20. Etruscan says Eslam Zathrum, 2 from 20. There's a whole further argument about whether these months line up with the Roman calendar or a local one, and I'm going to leave it alone, partly because I don't follow it. Column 8 has Celi Huthai Zathrumis. Same glossary gives Celius for September. So that leaves 20 plus Huth, and nobody is sure whether Huth is 4 or 6. Two Etruscan words, Huth and Sa, are 4 and 6. The question is which one is which. A tomb at Tarquinia is painted with a row of demons, and the fourth one along is labeled Huths. Then there are the dice. Etruscan dice have words on the faces instead of pips, and in 2011 a team went through 91 of them, and found that whatever the numbering scheme, on every die, 3 sits opposite 4. Psi is definitely 3. On the dice from Tuscania, the face opposite Psi reads Sa. So the entry in column 8 is the 24th of September. Or the 26th, sorry, I've just done the exact thing one commentator caught the other doing, which is use 4 on one page and 6 on the next. Which one you believe depends on whether you trust a fresco or a pile of gaming dice. The god named at that September date is Nethuns. Neptune. Nethuns doesn't appear anywhere before the autumn equinox, and then he's there. Somebody reads that as the rains arriving. Another god who comes down to us as Crapsty is in columns 3, 4, and 6, and then gone after midsummer. Wine and water. 3 times a libation. The text says sis vacal, and sis is thrice, from the word for 3. Vessels called thapna and thapsec, a bowl and a little bowl, with the ordinary Etruscan diminutive on the end. Piglets probably. A word, cletram, that most people take for a decorated litter, borrowed from Umbrian, where a cletra gets physically carried in procession at Gubbio. And then there are the passages no one has managed to crack. Column 7 has a run that goes male sia hia etnam sis vacalesvale, then almost the same words again a line later. A man called Maurice Gignard published a translation in the 60s on the theory that Etruscan is basically Old Norse. It is not. Nobody has bothered to do a better one since, which tells you roughly how much appetite there is for the job. That recurring formula ends with a word, Enas, and for most of the 20th century it was read as a place name, the community of Ina, wherever Ina was. Then Enrico Benelli argued that it isn't a name at all. It's an indefinite pronoun. Whomsoever. Which changes what the book is. Not the liturgy of one town, but a form with a blank in it, to be filled in by whichever city was performing the rite. Somebody wrote this expecting strangers to pick it up and use it, which is a strange thing to find in a culture we otherwise know almost entirely from its tombs. Take fleur. It shows up constantly. The English commentary reads it as the sacrificial victim, the animal on the altar. The Italian one reads the related fleur as the divine presence itself, and outside this book, on votive statuettes, that's clearly what the word does. So one of the commonest words in the longest Etruscan text either means the offering or the thing you offer it to. Somewhere in northern Etruria, the box between Arezzo, Perugia, Chiusi, and Cortona, 2nd century BC. Perugia, probably. Somebody always says Chiusi. And then it went to Egypt, and someone cut it into 11 bands with total indifference to the writing. Cut straight across the columns, through every line. Good linen, already about the right weight, the marks on it meaning nothing at all. Which is the only reason any of it is still here. How it got there is unsettled. The obvious explanation is recycling. Egyptian embalmers reused textiles routinely, and the 1989 radiocarbon study found at least 2 sets of wrappings on that one body with markedly different ages. The linen of the book itself dates to somewhere between about 360 and 210 BC. Although, flag on that, because there's a paper from 2023 that may have knocked the bottom out of that number. And I'd rather get ahead of myself than let you get attached to a date I'm about to take away. You will also see 390 BC, plus or minus 45, in a lot of places. That one's a muddle. It isn't a measurement of the book. The plus or minus isn't a plus or minus on a calendar year. It's the error on the radiocarbon age. That is a different quantity, and you run it through a curve to get dates. I had this explained to me, and I'm still not certain I have it the right way round. What I do know is that behind the single number, there's a spread of about 2 centuries. Right, 2023. A team including Margarita Gleba and Ruth Whitehouse, and the Zagreb curator himself went back and did structural, fiber, dye and radiocarbon analysis on 6 of the associated fabrics. Their dates span 1,000 years. They offer 2 explanations: ancient recycling, or a 19th century dealer assembling a saleable package out of whatever linen came to hand. The 1989 team had already voiced that suspicion in passing. And they report that new dating of the book itself gave unexpected results, and that the samples everyone has been citing may not have come from the book at all. Which means the range I gave you 5 minutes ago may be a range for somebody else's bandage. It's a chapter in a book I couldn't get hold of, so I have read the abstract and nothing else. Nobody much seems to have read the rest either. For a paper that may have just invalidated the standard date on the object, that is quite something. In 1910, Gustav Herbig found a previously unknown fragment stuck to another bandage with balsam, a piece of the beginning of the book. So the museum director had the strips glued onto a gauze backing to hold them together. 3 years after that, a pharmacologist at Rostock called Rudolf Kobert worked out a protocol for stripping the resin and the iron-bearing deposits off the linen, and warned that if nobody did it, those deposits would destroy the fabric, in his phrase, slowly but surely. Nobody did it. Not in 1913, not for a very long time after. January 1985. The bandages go to the Abegg Foundation's textile laboratory, near Bern, where Mechthild Fleury Lemberg takes off the 1910 gauze and remounts the whole thing properly between January and the end of April, with a professor from Perugia advising on how the columns should go back together. 72 years. Meanwhile, the mummy herself had her own troubles. Around 1900, book lice got into her and went for the legs, and the only treatment anyone had was immersion in petroleum. It killed the lice. It also weakened her joints so badly she had to be laid flat afterwards. Photography did most of the actual reading. By Krall's time, the ink had faded badly, so he hired a photochemist in 1891. In the 1930s, a Zagreb photochemist called Ivan Plotnikov, paid for by a Danish foundation, used infrared to recover 90 of the 245 lines that balsam staining had swallowed. In 1966, the museum had the whole text photographed in infrared in the laboratory of the Institute for Criminological Investigation. The Romans wrote on linen themselves, by the way. Livy, following an annalist called Licinius Macer, cites linen books kept in the temple of Juno Moneta with lists of magistrates in them. He notes that Aelius Tubero trusted them rather less. He has a Samnite linen book, carried into a ritual levee at Aquilonia in 293 BC. Modern historians think Macer's books were real enough, but nothing like as old as he believed. Either way, linen was an ordinary medium for a sacred text in Italy, and the Zagreb book is the only one of them left. She's still there too, in the Etruscan room of the Egyptian collection in Zagreb, in a sealed case. A woman in her 30s, about 1.63 meters, teeth and fingernails perfectly preserved, dead of natural causes. A papyrus was buried with her, naming a couple called Nesicons and Pericons. It postdates her by about a century, and the museum's own Egyptologist says there's no good reason to think it was hers. Nobody has put a hyperspectral camera on this. I have looked. It has been in Zagreb since barracks crates arrived, and the best images anyone has of the longest text in the language are the ones a police forensics lab took in 1966.